Great. Good afternoon, buenas tardes. Bienvenido a la reunión mensual del Comité Directivo AB617 de la Comunidad Portuaria. Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the March meeting of the AB617 Portside Steering Committee meeting. We're just going to give folks a few more minutes to log on, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Quiero avisar, sí, que tenemos interpretación para las personas que necesitan del inglés al español. Pueden acceder a la intérprete escogiendo el icono del globo del mundo y seleccionando español para el idioma que desean. So just advising that we do have Spanish translation interpretation, and that you can access that from the bottom of your menu screen by pressing the icon with the image of the world. And with that, Chewy, do you want to go ahead and should we get started?
Yeah, let's get started. So hello, everybody. My name is Chewy. I work with Daniela. I'll be co-leading this meeting as part of my own professional development, but Daniela is still here to help handle anything I'm unable to. Can we move to the next slide, please? So for today's meeting, the main objectives are to, for the San Diego Air Pollution Control District, to give the steering committee an update on the community emissions reduction plan, specifically the phase 1 implementation strategies. And we also have a presentation from the California Air Resources Board on preliminary results of their health modeling analysis. So for today's agenda, after roll call and some updates, we'll ask for an approval of the February meeting notes, as well as tonight's agenda. Following that, Domingo from the Air Pollution Control District will give a timeline update on the Serp. And following that, we'll have presentations from a few agencies on Serp update on phase 1 implementation strategies. After that, we will have a presentation from the California Air Resources Board on preliminary health modeling results. And then Kathy Keehan from the Air Pollution Control District will give an update on the AB617 incentive funding. And following that, we'll move on to public comments and closing remarks.
And then just a quick reminder of our meeting agreements. We want to make sure that we're creating space for everyone to contribute. We want to make sure that if we contribute often, that we step back, and that if we are a little bit shyer to talk, that we step up. Again, only one person speaking at a time to make sure that we can really listen to each other deeply, not just to listen, but for understanding, and making sure that we're respecting everyone's opinions and the different types of knowledge and perspective that everybody brings to this table. We're going to be conscious of time, which as facilitators, we're committed to you in 2021 to getting back on track to staying on time. And we are a bilingual space with a wonderful interpreter tonight. Thank you, Kayla. So we ask that everybody remember to speak slowly and clearly for the interpreter. And that is a special reminder for myself. So with that, I want to go ahead and do our roll call of the participants tonight. So if you see your name on the list, we can go ahead and ask you to start unmuting yourself. I also just want to bring one update to the steering committee roster, is that Olympia Beltran Andrade did email us that she is unfortunately, due to graduate school scheduling, unable to continue her participation on the steering committee, which means that there's another space for a community representative. We'll be following up with the other representatives that haven't responded to our emails over in the next few weeks, but that is one small update. So now I'm going to go ahead with roll call. So if you can just unmute and let me know if you're here or not. Ashley Garcia Tremonti.
Here.
Jack Monger.
Here.
And is Massey Hatch also here?
Here.
I feel like I'm always butchering your name. Is it Massey or
It's Massey. Massey Hatch.
Perfect. Okay,
I'm here.
I'm always so sorry. Sarah
No
Giotti.
problem.
Here.
Great. Sandy Naranjo.
Here.
Great. Larry Hofreiter.
Here.
Great. Elisa Arias, you're here.
I'm here.
Joy Williams.
Here.
Great. Jorge Gonzalez. Not here. Great. Martin Reeder emailed to let us know he'll be joining around 6:45, and that it's Chris Stanley's birthday, so he was unable to stand in. Roman Partido Lopez.
Here.
Great. Stephanie Yoon is also here and asked to be checked in early because she's busy at this moment. Dr. Sabrina Torino.
Here.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Perino. Jose Marquez Chavez.
I'm here.
Great. And
Hi,
is
Daniela.
Diane? Hi, Jose. And is Diane also here tonight?
Yes, here.
Hi, Diane.
Hi.
AC.
Here.
Great. Helen Haas. I think I saw Helen. Great. Liana Rios.
Here.
Hi, Liana.
Hi.
Filomena is also here and asked to check in early. She will, yes. Janice Reynoso. Janice, are you here? Okay, so not here. Janice is not here. Hillary Medina. Ted Gottschalk also let us know that unfortunately he's unable to be here tonight. Alicia Sanchez. And then Margarita Moreno.
Here.
Hola, Margarita.
Hola.
Irma Ortiz. No,
No sé si dijiste mi nombre, Daniela. Aquí estoy presente, ¿ok?
sí, ya la marqué. Sí, dije su nombre. Vanessa Contreras. No, Vanessa. Okay. Salvador Rafa Abrica. No, Salvador. Montserrat Hernández.
Here.
Great. Silvia Calzada.
Here.
Great. Ashley Valentín González.
Here.
Great. Josephine Talamantes.
I'm
Great.
here.
Great. Marisa Garcia.
Here.
Great. And Naomi Sanchez. Great. Okay, wonderful. Thank you all for doing that. And with that, back to you, Shui.
Thank you. And I also just wanted to give a quick reminder, when you use the chat function, make sure to use the all panelists and attendees function to make sure everyone can see those messages. And then moving along, I'll just ask for a motion from a steering committee member to approve the February meeting notes and tonight's agenda.
This is Stephanie Unard, motion to approve it.
I'll second.
Thank you, Stephanie. And that's a second from Josephine. Is anybody opposed or have any edits? Hearing none. Okay, so we'll get on. And then I'll pass it on to Domingo to give a timeline update on the community emissions reduction plan.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Great to be here with you once again. I just wanted to provide a quick update on our timeline based on our discussion we had last time. Just as a reminder, last time we agreed and the steering committee voted in favor of asking for some flexibility with our timeline. And we sent a letter to Carb asking for this flexibility. Carb staff confirmed receipt of the letter. So we have not yet received a reply, but we were advised that there weren't any concerns with our request, at least verbally. So with that in mind, I put together a revised timeline to run it through the subcommittee and I'm sorry, the steering committee, and get any input or just any questions anybody has. Can we go to the next slide, please? So in this present month, one of the things that we are continuing to do is our commitment to bring phase 1 implementation updates every other month. So March is one of those months where we are presenting that update. In this case, we will focus on the phase 1 strategies from the Navy, the shipyards, and the port. So we will be hearing from them. Then we also continue working on refining the chapters as needed, making sure that we have all the information that we need to have, that everything is current, and also continue coordinating with the subcommittees and implementing agencies to finalize the strategies. And that also includes finalizing the proposed Serp goals that EHC brought forward. So in the next coming weeks, we will be finalizing that the whole document so that we're ready for next month to open up a 3-week public comment period. Currently, the goal is to have that available and open it up on April 16th so that we can close in May 7th. And right in the middle of that, we'll have a couple of workshops, one on April 27th in the evening from 5 to 6:30 p.m. and another workshop on the 28th, which is a Wednesday, for around lunchtime from noon to 1:30 p.m. And as we get a little bit closer, we'll start advertising the workshop so that we can get enough notice and have provide time for people to prepare and attend the workshop. By that time, the documents will be available for everybody to review. Then the plan is to have bring another update on phase 1 implementation to the steering committee, and then continue refining our documents. And also on May, we will be presenting an update on the development of the Serp to our new APCD board. At this point, this will just be an informational update. It's not for the board to take any action on the Serp, but rather just to basically bring the new members up to speed as to where we're at with the Serp development. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in June, we will present our final proposed Serp to this steering committee for approval, which will include addressing any comments that need to be addressed from our public comment period. And then the plan is that in July, we will present the final Serp to our APCD board for their approval. In our request to Carb for additional flexibility, we asked for a couple of months, so that extends it to August. So our deadline to have an approved Serp is August. At this point, we do have a little bit of a buffer there just in case anything comes up, so that we still have the month of August in case it's needed to adopt the final Serp. But currently the goal is to bring that to our board in July. Does anybody have any questions at this point or comments on this? Good, hearing none. And you can always reach out to me via email, and I'm happy to connect with you and provide any additional information you may need. So that's it for my end right now. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Domingo. And now we're going to move on to the Serp phase 1 implementation strategies update.
And I believe we were going to start with the shipyards. Do we have a representative from the shipyards with us?
Yeah, you have me.
Okay, that's what I thought. I wasn't sure. Hi, Sarah.
Okay, this is Sarah from NASCO. Good evening, everyone. I am here, I work for NASCO, and this represents an effort between NASCO and the two other commercial shipyards on the waterfront, BAE and Continental Maritime. And obviously our operations are a little bit different, but we do have some opportunities to work together on policies. So one of the main things that we identified was implementing a policy to require that portable air compressors be either powered by zero emission technology or certified Tier 4 engines. I think our goal when we set this out was to have this in place by May of this year, because that was our understanding when the Serp was going to be approved. And so I'm actually happy to report that all three shipyards have actually already implemented this policy. So we're in it right now. We think that this has tremendous benefits of having similar policies across the three shipyards, because it helps to ensure that contractors that work at one yard don't drag older equipment down to another yard and use it there. So we kind of have the same standard in place for all three. The second thing we talked about was looking at ways to promote best practices to reduce diesel emissions, VOCs, and other emissions from ship repair activities. And we're going to partner with the Ship Repair Association to do a minimum of 3 outreach or training events each year. So we are in the process of planning our 3 outreach events for 2021, and we'll continue that through 2025. I think probably this first year we're going to be focusing on marine coating or painting activities, as well as diesel reductions. And the third is we wanted to, all three shipyards have some employee incentive programs in place to try and encourage people to use alternative forms of transportation, whether that's trolley, van, pools, or whatever. We all have slightly different programs, and we committed to work with Sandag to see what we could do to up our participation with those 3 things. I would say we are learning that COVID is creating sort of the asterisk year for us, and at least in our situation, we're seeing that that is affecting participation in both van, pools, and public transportation. But on the upside, I think all of our facilities also have people that are now working from home, which wasn't a situation. So we're going to do our best on this one, but I think as long as we're in COVID times, we have some challenges there. So those are my updates.
Great, thank you so much, Sarah. Does anyone have any questions for Sarah before we move on to the Navy?
Sarah, this is Domingo. I just have a quick question. Do you by any chance, or do any of the shipyards in this case happen to have data on the number of employees who are telecommuting?
Yeah, I know we do, and I guess I don't have that figure in front of me right now, but I can certainly get that. Yeah, I'm happy to get that.
I was just curious. Thank you.
I have a question, Sarah. This is Josephine. With regard to the 3 outreach meetings, is that strictly for the ship repair, or is that public, or is that, I mean, who are they geared towards?
Oh yeah, that's a really good question. So all of the shipyards, we have a pretty large contractor base, and this group of companies will come and work at various shipyards as well as Navy facilities. And oftentimes, you know, for example, it'll be abrasive blasting contractors or painting contractors, or you know, different folks that work in the shipyard. And so the idea is to direct the information towards them. Oftentimes they're smaller companies, and they aren't as well resourced in terms of being able to provide training materials. And so the idea is, you know, create some classes and outreach events that target them.
Okay, thank you. For contractors.
Largely, yeah. We already obviously have internal programs for our own employees, so we wanted to do something above and beyond what we were already doing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And great, just to lift up to in the chat box that Joy is saying good news on the air compressors, and thank you, Sarah, for the update and work to make this happen. So thank you, Sarah. It's exciting to see things that we planned for being done. Check. So yay.
Thanks.
So next up, AC with the Navy.
Hi, good evening. This is AC Demal with the Navy. Just some of the updates for our phase one, for phase one Serp. First off, we have our ships all our ships that come in port operate on maximum power. This is fully implemented, and we take great pride in the fact that we are the only operation of the ports that do maximize shore power for all ships. So we feel that's important. It's important for the Navy. It saves on energy and costs, and of course it definitely saves on air pollution and environment. So this has been fully implemented, and we will continue to do that to the fullest practical extent. The next is we are evaluating our monitoring emissions and making sure that those information is available to the public. So we're working with the district to, just to let you know, we have emissions inventories that we do annually for Naval Base San Diego. We do air toxics every 4 years, and we are now working with the district to best determine, to present that information to the public for you to review. And that way, the information is laid out. It's laid out as best as you can understand it, and to your satisfaction. So we'll be working with the Navy, with the district on that. The next phase is also the last phase of the early phases is that we are doing our best to make sure that we reduce emissions from employee transportation associated with travel to the base. And as you know, it's a little bit harder to quantify at this time because of COVID, right? And many employees are at home or working from home. But rest assured that we still are fully exercising what we call the TIP program, the Transit Incentive Program. This program is available for anyone and everyone. And what it is it allows people to use the public transportation. So either the trolley or the bus route. We recently built a new headquarters downtown, and there's not much parking around that area. And so many of the staff that comes in and that includes a lot of us here in the Navy who attend this Ab617 meetings, go to use the TIPS program to travel to work. And of course that saves on mobile traffic and congestion. And that's all that I have. So any questions?
I see a question from Joy.
Yes, Joy.
Hi, thanks for that update. I just wanted to know on the first one about the shore power, do you have any estimates on what proportion of ships are shore powering, or what percentage of hours at berth are being shore powered, anything like that?
I mean, bottom line is as soon as they come to the docks, they shut down everything, and even their auxiliary boilers, and everything is attached to is plugged into the grid. So
So are you saying it's 100%?
yeah, and we actually have made some calculations on exactly how much emissions we are saving, we are reducing as a result of shore power. I can get those numbers. I know it's in my files, but I can dig up those numbers. But it's pretty impressive exactly how much is shifted is saved by shifting everything to shore power.
Well, that's good news. Can you tell us, why, or what circumstances would it not be feasible to shore power?
Honestly, I don't think there is one. I mean, we just, it is command that all ships that come into port must go on to shore power. We do have, again, when it's practical, and so, unless there's some kind of emergency, we would, there's emergency with the grid or something, we would have to shut, ships would have to go onto shore, onto their own power, But besides that, we are very, very careful. We make sure, actually, there is one situation where ships were asked to go onto their own power, and that's during the brownout. And as you remember, during the summertime, we all of California was suffering this major brownouts at the request of the California governor and the power companies. They asked us to go on to have the ships get offshore power so that they can provide power to all the homes. And in fact, when the ships did that, I believe somewhere in the neighborhood of 100,000 homes were allowed to have power during the brownout phases. So we actually got a big thank you from the governor during that time. But that's really, those are only very rare circumstances where the ships would actually go off the shore power. And that is in an extent of, emergencies like the brownout.
Okay, well, that's good news. Thank you.
Thank you. I also wanted to see if Helen had anything else to add. I saw that she had her hand raised.
Oh, hi, everyone. No, actually, I didn't want to interrupt AC, but yeah, I was going to mention the example exactly that last summer we had the request from the governor specifically. We wouldn't take any ships off power unless it's requested, and there's a priority over emissions because it is convenient and is a win-win situation for everyone for us to keep it. And because of our unique operations, we are able to actually do that. We don't have as much ships coming in and out. When they come in, they stay for maintenance or for a long period. So that facilitates it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now we'll move it on to Monica.
Yeah, hi, I just have a quick question. For the Employees Transit Incentives Program, have any idea about how many employees use that program? Would you consider that to be like successful or not successful? Any idea to gauge percentage or wise?
Yeah, actually, I don't know, Helen, you sent me that data the other day? I don't know if you have that information available.
I'm sorry, what was the question? I thought was for you. Sorry, can you repeat it, please?
For the Transit Incentives Program, about how many employees use that program? Do you say, is that a successful program among your employees, or?
I would say it is a successful. Every time we have a new employee, part of the bringing on board is offering, and it is an explanation of the TIP program. So we campaign that to any newcomer. We make it very available. We actually increased the number of TIP participants when we actually made the new building and reduced parking. So it was a carrot and stick situation. We were able to improve in that way. We had approximately for the San Diego area, more than 3,000 participants. But due to COVID, a lot of people went into a suspended status because they are working from home. So as we know, COVID is a very unusual thing. Thank you for the question.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just wanted to point out, Dr. Perino had a question if there is any health data being collected about the sailors and shipbuilders who spend many hours at the port. And Fortunado also asked if diesel equipment gets tested before deployment.
We actually have our IH folks do the monitoring, and so that's that's probably the most part of health data that's being collected. And in fact, we actually talked with some of our IH folks the other day. So I know that data is being that data is available to. It is being collected. I'd have to look into making that data available, but I know that that's done for various activities done on the base. As for the diesel equipment getting tested before deployment, I would I can't say for sure positively, but remember these ships when they deploy, they might deploy up to 6 to 8 months. So, it's important to make sure that everything that is there is not, is in working order before they deploy out to the seas, and especially if there's some kind of emergency action that needs to be done, or some kind of military action that needs to be made. You know, you can probably guarantee that they're trying to make sure that none of that diesel equipment is working in working order. So, and again, I can't vouch for that, but it just I would just assume that that's, you know, during the time that a ship is anchored, they're looking over everything, making sure everything is expected to the max, and repairs are done maximally to make sure the ship is in, you know, 100% before it deploys out to seas.
Thanks, AC. And lastly, I just wanted to point out Roman's comment about saying, I believe we had previously talked about having a baseline for the TIPS programs to be able to see an increase and decrease.
We are currently, we actually found the contact for the TIPS coordinator here, and you know, it took a little bit of digging, but we found the TIPS coordinator. So we'll be working with the TIPS coordinator and getting that baseline data, because you know, we absolutely want to know how much are we attracting, how much of a changes are we seeing on a annual basis, and you know, taking into account that we have COVID going on, you know, how, you know, can we get that data? You know, how can we show changes? And hopefully it's positive. So yeah, I mean, we do want to get that baseline determined, and we will be working with our TIPS program to get that information for you.
Thank you, AC. And if nobody else has any questions, I think we can move on to the Port of San Diego.
Sure. This is Domingo. I have just a very quick comment on the data. I think it would be very helpful if for anybody, you know, any of our presenters tonight, if they have data on their different efforts, if they could share it with us so that we can capture that, so that we can track this implementation, and also because you know, it's important to tell the good news stories on all these good efforts that everybody's working on. So if you know, if there's data available for any of the pieces, please share it with us so that we can start tracking that and capturing it. Thank you.
Thank you. And I see Helen has a response.
I want to share with everyone why is it difficulty for us to get the data, so you understand our processes, so you guys can understand the delay. On the TIPS program, each individual tenant on the base, on each of the 3 bases we have in the metropolitan area of San Diego, has its own TIP coordinator. And those people have an assigned duty, and sometimes they're deployed. So I have at least 500 tenant commands in each installation. I'm joking about the number, but several hundred commands to actually reach each one and try to collect that data. So we'll do our best, but it is looking for very small data on each tenant command. So it will take a while. So I just hope that everyone can understand what the process is. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks for the clarification, Helen.
Thank you. And with that, I think we can move on to the Port of San Diego.
Hi, Chewy. Hi, everyone. So I'm Commissioner Naranjo, and I just want to share quickly that for those of you that are aware, we are working on the Maritime Clean Air Strategy, and we're having the public review document be released on Tuesday. So be prepared for that for next Tuesday. We're going to allow for a month, like 4 weeks for public comment. And I'm going to pass this to Larry, and Larry's going to walk through the phase 1.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner. As Commissioner said, this is just a status update. We are going to be committing to new strategies going forward as part of the MCAS document. So I encourage everyone to review that. The other item I'd like to just mention is you'll see in terms of our status update, a lot of the items here are not just solely the responsibility of the port, but you'll see that a lot of our tenants kind of has stepped up to really help advance some of these emission reduction efforts. So with that, I'll just go through. I think there's actually 6 strategies that the port committed to. The first is to advance the deployment of heavy duty on-road electric trucks and to reduce emissions within the portside community. So two status updates on that is our port tenants received a grant, as many of you are aware, to do freight signal prioritization. So they started that in December of 2020, and that's ongoing. So, and we're able to reduce emissions essentially by giving freight vehicles a prioritization at the stops so they don't have that stop and go traffic. So as data comes out as a result of that program, I'm happy to share it with the folks here. We also have zero emission on-road trucks currently in use. We have 3 BYD trucks that go out to Otay at National City, and we have 2 BYD on-road zero emission trucks that travel to the working waterfront as well as out to Otay. Another one of our strategies is to support a dedicated truck route. So we have route signage for arrivals and departures. We have truck route brochures in both English and Spanish. We have a truck hotline that we encourage people to call where they can talk directly to our terminal supervisors. And our maritime and harbor police have also been coordinating with the San Diego Police Department on enforcement of that truck route. The third one, I think the next slide, please. We've also committed to reducing diesel emissions from cargo handling equipment. So we currently have 2 zero emission yard trucks that are in operation at 10th Avenue, one of our tenants. And we also, one of our tenants also received funds for 5 zero emission pieces of equipment. 2 zero emission heavy duty forklifts, 2 zero emission reach stackers, and 1 zero emission container handler. Also, the port owns 1 piece of equipment at the terminal. It's a harbor crane. So we're analyzing the replacement of that crane with near zero emission technology. We've also committed to reducing emissions from ships at berth. So we have plans to install a second shore power outlet at the cruise ship terminal by December of 2022. And we're working with Pasha Automotive on their terminal action plan to install shore power at the National Terminal, which needs to be done by December of this year. We're also working closely with our funder on procuring a emission capture and control system that we want to get up and running at 10th Avenue and National City. We've also committed to reducing emissions from hovercraft. One of our tenants is trying to secure funding for e-tug, the first electric tug, probably I think in North America from what I understand. So we're working with them in terms of getting the permitting to site the on-site charging equipment to support that. And we're also exploring electrification of infrastructure for other hovercraft at our marinas. And then finally, we're also promoting adoption of zero emission technology by tenants and truckers and others. Our Port Tenants Association gave a really excellent lessons learned workshop on March 11th to share some of the lessons they learned with some of this early zero emission demonstration equipment. We're on schedule, the port is on schedule to install 26 additional public chargers on tidelands, and that's for on passenger vehicles. And our Port General Services is working with Power Your Drive for Fleets program, so we can have charging infrastructure for our port fleet. So I'm happy to answer any questions, or if people want to follow up after the meeting later on this week, happy to talk in more detail about any of this. Thank you.
Anybody have questions? Feel free to raise your hand so we can call on you. Seeing none.
Chuy, this is Domingo. I just wanted to make a quick comment and wanted to take a moment to acknowledge all the great efforts that are being made on implementing the Serp from all these different partners. I think it's important to celebrate all victories, small, medium, and large, and there's certainly a lot of work being done and a lot of progress being made on our phase 1 strategies. So really looking forward to continuing that work and continuing that partnership. It's great to have all of you here at the table, and great, even better to see all the results from the hard work. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Domingo, and thank you, everybody. Now, I think we can move on to ARB on the preliminary modeling results.
I believe Vernon Hughes
Yep.
and Jeremy Avis are going to be our presenters. So
Yeah, hi, good evening, everybody. This is Vernon Hughes from Carb. Can you hear me okay, Daniela?
yes, perfect.
Very good. Okay. So yeah, I'm with the Office of Community Air Protection at Carb. I think many of you have seen me over the time of developing the programs here at Portside. I'm here with Jeremy Avis from our Air Quality Planning and Science Division. And as we committed to early on when the steering committee was looking at Action A3 on looking at essentially evaluating health effects, health outcomes, in particular, the action, if you could go to the next slide, Daniela, that would be great. This is just a recap of Action A3 to develop a plan to quantify and prioritize the community health risks from air pollutants. And so when we talked about this early on, the thought was a two-part process. First part, developing a plan in phase 1, and then implementing the plan in phase 2. And as part of feeding into this, air quality modeling is a tool that is certainly applicable here. And so Jeremy and team have put together some preliminary modeling and really wanted to run the approach by you. And Jeremy's going to walk through a summary of the work that was done, as well as some of the limitations of the work. And we want to get a sense for the types of questions that the steering committee has, and especially in just looking at your Action A3, the goals, the objectives that you're interested in. So really up at the top of the action, the course of action, we're kind of in the first couple of bullets there, trying to understand what your needs are. And then from there, we can kind of go into developing this plan and then implementing it. So really today is really about the plan, understanding what your needs are, and again, giving you some insight into the work that Jeremy's team can do. So Jeremy will go ahead and present the preliminary results. And of course, on this next slide here, integrating, as was mentioned just a few minutes ago, integrating the EHC recommended goals into the Serp. So there's some applicability here as well as Action A3. So Jeremy's going to present some of the preliminary results, and then he'll kick it back to me under next steps, and we can talk through a little bit, again, focusing on the goals and objectives of the steering committee and next steps to develop that plan. So from here, Jeremy, you want to take it away?
Great. Thanks, Vernon. Oop, let's go back one slide real quick. Yeah, perfect. So yeah, so today what we're hoping to do here is we've recently conducted some regional air toxics risk modeling for the greater San Diego region. And we want to present that and start thinking about whether this is something that can be used to inform some of your work at the community level. And so a couple of things to keep in mind when we're looking at some of the modeling today. One is really what we want to focus on is thinking about the types of things that we can do with this modeling, and less about exact numbers that we're presenting today, because this is preliminary modeling and we really are looking for feedback from you as a community, kind of get a better idea of the types of things you may want to try to answer with modeling, and then we can go back and think about what we can actually do to help you in that regard. So next slide. Okay, so just quickly, the two main objectives today: first, to present the preliminary regional air toxics modeling as a potential option to support the draft Portside Serp strategy, and then to discuss sort of next steps and where we go from here. Back real quick. And then just to orient ourselves a little bit, On the bottom here, what we're showing is a map of the region that we modeled for the regional air toxics modeling. And so with that modeling, what we're doing is quantifying the emissions of all sources within that red box. And then we're modeling the transport and dispersion of those emissions and estimating ambient concentrations in the air. And so when we're showing results for the community, keep in mind that we're not strictly modeling the community separately. We're actually modeling all sources within that red box. And so when we're looking at the contribution of specific source categories like, say, diesel trucks to risk within the community, it's not just those sources within the community that are affecting things. It's actually sources outside of that community as well. Anything within that red box. So, next slide. Okay, so this is just a very, very simple flow diagram of sort of some inputs and then outputs from modeling. And so really the two big ones, the two most important ones are emissions and meteorology. And so what do models do? Well, they take emissions and they take meteorology inputs and they simulate the transport and dispersion as well as the chemical transformation, so chemical formation of pollutants in the atmosphere and other physical processes that play on those emissions in the atmosphere to estimate pollutant concentrations. And so I think an easy way to think of this is they're similar to weather models, but for air pollution. Okay, next slide. Okay, so then why would we want to use models? So models can be very useful for things like we can use them to assess the contribution of different emission sources to total exposure within the community. So we can look at the contribution of, say, diesel trucks compared to ocean-going vessels and get a better idea of which one is contributing more to the overall risk at a specific area within the community. We can also use modeling to assess the efficacy of emission controls. So how effective are different emission controls, right? You want to make sure that whatever you're proposing for emission controls are actually going to achieve the improvements to air quality that you expect. We can use modeling to provide continuous and large spatial coverage. So if we could, we would just put monitors everywhere, but that's generally cost prohibitive. And so we can use modeling to help fill in the gaps between where we're actually making on the ground measurements. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that models are not perfect. So it is very important to select the appropriate models for the questions we're trying to answer, as well as the appropriate inputs and model configuration. And then model performance is also a critical piece of this. Okay, so next slide. So now we'll start to look at some of the preliminary Carb modeling. Okay, so we're not just presenting direct model output. We are actually doing a air toxics risk assessment. And so there are four main pieces to that. There's estimating the emissions, conducting the modeling, and then estimating the population exposure, and then characterizing potential health risks. And the one thing to keep in mind here is that when we're looking at health risk, and we see some of these maps that I'll show in just a bit, is it's really a combination of modeled concentrations as well as population in that region. So there is a combined effect there when we're characterizing health risks. Okay, next slide. Okay, so just very quickly, and this is glossing over a lot of the details here, but we're modeling for the year 2017. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that emissions and meteorology, as well as other inputs, reflect 2017 conditions. So a lot of the great things that we heard earlier today about all these efforts to reduce emissions within the community are not going to be reflected in what we're looking at here today. We're using two different types of models. The first is a dispersion model, and dispersion models we're using to simulate diesel particulate matter, or diesel PM or DPM, as well as metals. And then we're using a chemistry model to simulate toxic volatile organic compounds, or VOCs. And I'll talk a little bit about why we're using those different models in a slide or two. So next slide. Okay, so first, dispersion models, dispersion modeling. So the model we're using is a model called CalPUF, and it is very good for near source to regional impacts of inert compounds. So things like diesel PM and heavy metals that are not undergoing any sort of chemical transformation in the atmosphere. So that's why we can't model toxic VOCs with this type of model because of the chemistry aspect. And I'll talk about that in just a second. So there are three types of or general classifications of emission sources for dispersion modeling. The first is an area source. So an example of that would be something like commercial hovercraft or gas stations, where we know generally where the emissions occur, their general locations and activity, but we may not know true specifics of exactly where different crafts or hovercrafts are actually moving in the water. And so we generally model those as area sources. So we're averaging over some given area. The other type of emission source we look at are point sources. And so those are things like industrial facilities where we know the exact location, we know the exact sort of stack height, we can model those sources explicitly. And then the third type of source is a line source. So this would be something like trucks or passenger vehicles, where we know where the major roadways are, we know the activity on those roadways, and so we can break them up into small lines and we can model emissions off of those roadways. Okay, next slide. All right, so here's just an example of some of the types of emissions that actually went into the modeling to get a better idea of what they look like spatially. So on the left is stationary point sources. So you can see here we know exactly where those are and we can model the exact location of those sources. The other is on-road sources or line sources. And so here you can see it's kind of hard to see here because of the light green color, but we're able to capture the majority of the major roadways. Some of the surface roads within the community may not be captured as well, but at least in terms of the major roadways, we're capturing all of those. And then something like OGV is going to be a combination of point sources and line or area sources. And then last, a look at area sources. I think this gives you, for commercial hovercraft, this gives you a good idea of the type of averaging that happens with the area sources. And that's something to keep in mind when we're looking at the contribution of different sources, is that they're represented differently in the modeling. And that can lead to some differences. Okay, and then one thing I do want to point out with this modeling is that with the dispersion modeling, the modeling output is being sampled at the census block level. And what that means is that sub-census block variations in model pollutant concentrations will be lost. So that's something to keep in mind. And I'll come back to that a little bit at the end when we talk about some of the limitations of the modeling. Okay, that's fine, we'll jump on. So I was just going to say that an example of that was something like residence or a school that's close to a metalworking or plater facility. Those would not be captured within this modeling. Okay, next slide. Okay, so here is just a look at total diesel PM concentration and the associated cancer risk. And so one thing to point out here is that the cancer risk associated with diesel PM within the community is not uniform. So it varies depending on where you are in that community. And that's because of the location of different emission sources. And then the same with the cancer risk. And so overall, diesel PM is the largest contributor to cancer risk at roughly 84% of the total risk. And then next slide, we'll break this down a little bit more. So with diesel PM, rather than just looking at total diesel PM, we can look at diesel PM from different emission categories or classifications. And so we can look at things like on the far left there, on-road diesel PM, so the contribution to cancer risk from major traffic lanes. Or we can look at something like commercial hovercraft impacts. And the previous slide, we were looking at the combined effects from all of those, but the nice thing with the modeling is that we can actually separate those out, and we can look at, we can generate like a pie chart that we're looking at on the right, where you can break down the contribution of different source categories to the cancer risk within the community. And one thing to keep in mind is the pie chart on the far right is looking at sort of averages over the total community. And it's obvious when you're just looking at the two figures to the left that there are some big spatial differences. in terms of where you're located within the community and the associated risks. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we can do the same things with heavy metals. So this is just a look at the total contribution of heavy metals to cancer risk. This is the smallest contribution at roughly 1% of the total risk. But again, we can break things down by different source categories, like we see to the right, that can help inform sort of which categories you may want to target. Okay, next slide. Okay, so now we'll switch gears a little bit and think about the chemistry modeling. So chemistry modeling is good for pollutants that are subject to chemical processes in the atmosphere, such as toxic VOCs. And these are the models that really are analogous to weather models, but just for regional air quality. And so the difference between the chemistry modeling and the dispersion modeling is that with chemistry modeling, all emission sources within a given region, or what we call a grid cell, are added together and treated as a single emission source. And then the pollution is moved between these grid cells. So you really do lose a lot of spatial information when we're using these chemistry models. And that's unfortunately just a byproduct of it, but you have to do that to get the actual chemistry. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so this is just a look at emissions for different toxic VOCs. And what I just want to point out here is the difference in sort of spatial representation from the dispersion modeling to the chemistry modeling. So here you can see we're averaging over much larger areas, where one grid cell can essentially span from one side of, east-west, one side of the community to another. And because of that, with the chemistry modeling, go ahead, next slide. And so because of that, with the chemistry modeling, we can no longer average things and sample things at the census block level. We now have to do it at the census tract level, which is a much greater area. So we lose a lot of that spatial information. So here, any sub-census tract variations in the model pollutant concentrations will be lost. Okay, next slide. So this is a look at the contribution of total toxic VOCs to the total cancer risk. And it amounts to roughly 15% of the total. And you can see just the spatial distribution here, that we're looking at a much coarser spatial representation at the census tract. And then on the right, the pie chart, with diesel PM and heavy metals, we were looking at the contribution of specific source categories. With the chemistry model, we can't break things down that way anymore. So all we can do is look at individual toxic VOC species. And what this represents is not only toxic VOCs that are emitted directly into the atmosphere, but toxic VOCs that are also formed in the atmosphere. Okay, next slide. Okay, and then in the end, we can combine the cancer risk associated with diesel PM, heavy metals, and toxic VOCs, and you get a map that looks like what we're showing on the left. And then we can break things down with the pie chart on the right, where we're looking at the contribution from the different toxic species. Okay, so a quick summary of the results. So the majority of the cancer risk in the portside community is associated with diesel PM. Less so from toxics, and then a minimal, or toxic VOCs, and then a minimal contribution from heavy metals. The cancer risk is not uniform throughout the community. So there was, I think, large spatial variations in the cancer risk associated with the spatial distribution of the emission sources. And then the cancer risk assessment includes sources outside of the community. So to isolate the impact of sources within the community only would require new modeling. So we can't get that from this analysis that we've already conducted. Next slide. Okay, and then some of the limitations of the current analysis. So the 2017 base year that we're using for this modeling does not include reductions from future regulatory efforts. And Vernon will touch on this a bit in just a minute. And we cannot separate out the contribution from similar sources within the community from those outside of the community. So for example, emissions from diesel trucks on major freeways. When we look at that contribution, it's the contribution from those trucks within and outside of the community. The health risk calculations are population weighted at the census tract level, so they do not reflect maximum concentrations. And so what that means is this analysis is not designed to assess hotspot impacts from individual facilities. And so, for example, exposure at the census block or tract level may not represent exposure to peak concentrations. Next slide. Okay, so then what can we answer with the current analysis? So we can assess cumulative population exposure and toxic health risk. We can quantify the relative contribution of different emission sources or categories, including those located outside of the portside community. We can identify geographic areas with high pollution burden. We can help identify strategies for reducing exposure and health risk. And then we can fill in the gaps between the monitoring network with this type of analysis. Okay, and then I think Vernon's gonna take over, and then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for questions at the end here.
All right, thanks, Jeremy. Let's see, you can go to the next slide. So again, just circling back to the introduction on, in particular, we just saw some preliminary work that the modeling team at Carb has done. Jeremy went through some of the types of questions that can be answered, some of the limitations. So really want to get a sense for, given the capabilities of the modeling, perhaps some changes that can be made, like understanding the influence of sources outside of the community versus inside. Putting together a phase 1 work plan would be really valuable. And part of that would be really understanding the types of questions that the CSC is interested in asking or answering. What are your goals? What are your objectives? So yeah, I guess there's two parts of this. There may be certain questions that can be answered now with the current modeling, and some adjustments that you may want to see. So yeah, go ahead and go to the next slide. So Jeremy alluded to this. So again, this modeling was conducted for calendar year 2017. And so keep in mind the plot there on the left-hand side, the bar chart. That's a bar chart of the inventory for the community. In 2018, the modeling was done for 2017. This is an inventory that has calendar year 2018, 2025, and 2030. And this is for diesel PM. And the stacked part of the bars there are the off-road components of diesel PM sources, on-road, stationary, and area-wide. And you can see, for instance, the slice of the pie there, the yellow or gold stacked bar, the difference between 2018 and 2025 and 2030, that those emissions are being reduced by a little over 80% in the inventory. So while the influence of diesel PM from those mobile sources in 2017 or 2018 can be a driver, can be high, and even though the contribution compared to the total is a fraction of the total, the influence is great. For the pie chart on the right, you see that the influence, 40% from traffic links, is high. But again, that 40%, this pie will be kind of readjusted as you move into future years, and the control programs that are on the books. Larry went over the ports plan and the goals of the port plan. So just keep in mind the change in source mix and the contribution of those sources to the concentrations that you'll see in the community in the years to come. You have 5 years to implement the Serp in the community. That might influence the sources that you really want to focus on moving forward. So I think a good discussion at this point is maybe we can take questions, and then maybe moving forward, next steps the steering committee may want to think about the work plan, and Carb is certainly available to, to help kind of flesh that out. And that way, any changes that we make to the modeling really is geared toward addressing your needs.
Thank you, Vernon and Jeremy. I see Sarah has a question or comment.
Yeah, Vernon, thank you for a very informative presentation. We all know where diesel PM comes from. I saw the next biggest category was toxic VOCs. Those particular VOCs that are showing up heavily weighting there, can you give us an idea where those are coming from?
Yeah, so you have a breakdown there, Jeremy, right? Yeah, I think that there we go. So, yeah, go ahead, Jeremy.
No, I was just gonna say, I think the question is, what are the sources of those? Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think we would want to go back and look at the inventory first. But the one thing to keep in mind is that these are not only directly emitted, they're also formed in the atmosphere. Some of these, it might be 50-50, some of it might be 80-20 formed versus emitted. So it's a little harder than, say, something like diesel PM, where it's directly emitted and doesn't change in the atmosphere, to actually back out what's contributing most. So we need to go back and look at the inventory and think a little bit about what we can say, given the fact that there is this complicating factor of chemistry in there. But that's something we can look at. And
I think the thing that was surprising to me was, I think acetaldehyde, benzene, butadiene, those tend to be fuel combustion byproducts for the most part. The one that stood out a little bit was the chlorinated solvent. I thought that a lot of those had just been almost not in use anymore. I thought that there was a lot of regulations to take those out of circulation. So it was surprising that was still showing up.
Yeah, many of those, like the 1,3-butadiene, benzene, and so on, are, as you said, Sarah, are related to like gasoline and such. But as Jeremy said, there could be many different sources.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Jack?
Hi, thank you. Thanks for that presentation again, Vernon and Jeremy. Some more questions now that I have a number of questions. I won't take up the time with all of mine. I'll come back and get some of them after everybody's had a chance. But looking at that very same slide 43, and when you talk about where should we be focusing on, or you're looking for input about where the community would like to focus. In other words, what are the toxics of highest concern? Chromium-6 shown there at the top of the left-hand box at 0.23%, and maybe nickel to some extent, are probably results from, maybe could be results from welding, right? So I guess I would just point this out to our own district that we're embarking on a major review of welding permitting and welding impacts, when, as Carb's data shows, it is almost an unmeasurable impact when it comes to looking at those toxics that are of concern to the Portside community. Is that a fair assumption?
I think the one thing to keep in mind is the limitation here is that we are taking this and looking at the census block and then census tract level. And if you were to look at some sort of a hotspot type impact, you may see a much bigger impact over a small region. So that's the one thing to keep in mind.
Yeah,
so that could vary.
Yeah.
Yeah. And another element of this is, so scale is one issue. Like Jeremy said, if there's a welding or plating next door or very close to a sensitive receptor, we'll call it, the gradient of pollutants coming off of that aren't captured in this particular modeling. Things are kind of averaged out over a larger area. There is, however, and part of AB617 and the Serps will be a review under AB 2588. It's a review of sources. It's the facility risk reduction audits concept for facilities that the district has characterized as having a high priority. The work that goes into establishing a reduction program for that particular facility. So there are, for the facilities that have high emissions and a high priority, there are existing plans to reduce emissions from those facilities and modeling that's more local scale.
Can I ask on the toxic hotspot question then, would that be another analysis you guys would be able to do with the current data, or would that be a potential next step? Or sorry to jump in next.
Not with the approach we're taking now, that we would not be able to capture that.
So it certainly, I guess, raises a flag and says that as we go forward looking at some of these other sources, be mindful that at least in terms of this representation, the overall impact indicates it's very, very small. And as you said, unless we have a situation where there is close proximity of sensitive receptors, we may not have any impact at all from those types of welding operations. Could I ask you on slide 37, what does, and I missed this last time, I think, what does CTI stand for?
That is the California Toxics Inventory.
Okay. All right. Let's see. And then on slide 44, just to understand this, because we got in this discussion last time, Joy asked about being able to measure those, well, I think she was looking and asking about diesel PM at that point, that is generated on within the community, right, but on the freeway or on the San Diego Coronado Bridge versus in the community itself. Just to have an understanding of kind of what impacts we're looking at from those two sources. And I think at the time your response was, well, that might be difficult. Had you had any more thought on whether or not or how that could be done, so the community could have a sense of where, again, to what extent those emissions and where they're being generated?
Yeah, we had some discussion, and we think it is, with the current inventory that we have, we think it is possible to separate out emissions from sort of the highway kind of traffic links versus more local. That still doesn't necessarily get at, how, are we fully representing the road network within the community? We're still really hitting sort of the major roads, but we do think that we can separate those out.
Yeah, and just to expand on that a little bit, and thanks to Sandag, we did have a follow-up meeting with Elisa Arias and her staff yesterday to kind of talk through, potential improvements that could be made with on the on-road network. That may be out of the time frame that the steering committee would like results. But given, there is some flexibility on timing that's being discussed, something to think about. And we'll continue to talk with Sandag and the staff. And again, really appreciate Elise's time and her staff's time. And just a bit of a tangent there. You may all recall in the first year of community selection, one of the elements that went into the Carb board selecting Portside is really looking at the regional and source diversity. You're an urban area with a port, with military activity, lots of industrial activity. It's the transferability concept. There's a lot to learn here in your community, and we, Carb, we want to directly support Portside, but we also want to look forward and learn from this experience. And having those interactions like with Sandag and with you all now really helps us to sort of look forward to how we can improve the work products that we bring to steering committees. So we are looking at learning from your questions, your needs as well.
Thank you. I wanted a quick question, if I'm not taking up too much time, Daniela, if I got time for one more. Okay, let's see here. Oh, yeah, because the line sources then that you referred to earlier than slide 37, I'm not sure what number that was on. So the definition of that is these are, according in your modeling, these are the sources. You can measure these that are occurring along a freeway or a road or that sort of thing, right?
Right. Yeah. So it could be trains as well, but anything that we can break down into, yeah, sort of a specific line.
Okay. All right. I don't mean to be redundant on some of these, but I'm not an air scientist by any stretch, and sometimes I feel like we rush through so much of this information and it's so technical. I know that I'm missing things, and I suspect other people are too. So I just like to go back and get a couple of them clarified. So thanks for doing that. And I'll hold off on the rest until everybody else has a chance to respond.
Yeah, if I can just really quick address, Daniela, is there time for additional conversation here? I know you have other things on the agenda, but I did want to address a couple of Jack's comments here. I think it's important for the steering committee.
We have until 7:30 for this item. So, and we do have a hand up from Larry, and I do want to also remember, if you're in attendee mode, you can also raise your hand or chat your question to the box. Make sure you chat to all panelists and attendees. Again, if anyone else has a question or comment, reminder to
Real quick too, I do have a message here from Leo Ramirez, who he leads the group that does all the emission inventory work for the modeling. And he's saying that 1,3-butadiene, last he looked, is coming mainly from plastics manufacturing.
Interesting. Okay, so yeah, real quick on Jack's questions as well. So there is a slide, it's up about, I don't know, 5 or 6 slides. It has you can see a red stripe along the roadways that parallels the, yeah, right there. So yeah, so to the, Jack, you mentioned about measuring vehicle traffic, et cetera. So these, I'll say the activity, so the number of vehicles, the type of vehicles, their speeds, that all forms emission rates for the vehicles that transit the roadways. So you see the dark red stripe there on where the roadways are. Again, looking at future years, the diesel PM anyways along the roadways, looking at the inventory, just that basic bar chart being reduced 80%. So that those gradients may be significantly reduced. And then just one other comment on the term of measuring information to validate the models is also something to think about. There is a nice tie with the community air monitoring program that the community is embarking on. That validating the modeling results too is another potential interest to take some of the measurements that are collected. How well does the model perform and match those measurements? That's another important way of validating this tool. Depending on the types of questions you want to have answered.
Thanks, Vernon.
Thank you. Okay, I just wanted to move on to Larry.
Sure. Thanks, Vernon and Jeremy. Excellent presentation. Very, very informative. I do actually have a couple of questions on this slide. So the first, I wanted to, first of all, make sure I'm interpreting the pie chart on the right-hand side. It's saying that right now, based upon the 2017 inventory, the traffic is 40% we're attributing about 40% of the DPM to on-road traffic. So that's good. Then I guess my other question is, it looks like commercial hovercraft is pretty big at 19%, which is out at bay. So I guess one of the things I wanted to talk about, or maybe have you guys provide some clarification on, when we've done our emissions inventory at the port, right? We add up all of our vessels, all of the activity, and we kind of get an overall number. But I think one of the things that my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, but some of that commercial harbor craft is happening out at bay, or it's happening kind of outside of the direct proximity of where a lot of the sensitive receptors are. So I guess my question is, can maybe you guys just explain how the modeling takes into account proximity of the sources, and I guess clarify if that 19% is attributable to the PM quote cancer risk, or is that just overall 19% of diesel particulate matter?
So the 19% is cancer risk. So that is going to take into account, population and things like that. It's not just total concentration. And then in terms of how we account for, so diesel PM, I think if you go up, is it one or two slides? There's a, there was one slide where we had this slide here. So if you look at like say commercial harbor craft as an area source here, essentially what the modeling is going to do is it's going to take emissions from this area, and it's going to look at transport of those emissions downwind. So when you see the contribution, you're seeing it's not just the emissions, but it's where they're being transported.
Got it. Thank you. That's good to know.
Thank you. Any more questions from anybody on the steering committee or from the public? I see a question from someone from the public. I'll give it to Akshita.
Hi, can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. This is really helpful. I just have a question, keeping the fact that AB617 is at least meant to expand the study of emissions into not only greenhouse gases and not only, into essentially, what's it called? Sorry, I am dealing with an orbital fracture and I can barely think. But anyway, the point is, I know the AB617 was meant to expand into toxics, right? So keeping that in mind, and keeping in mind that AB617 was also meant to move from modeling at the regional basin level into a more the neighborhood scale. What are some best practices you might be able to recommend, given the work that, given this preliminary modeling, that you think can bridge the gap between the regional scale modeling of both dispersion and chemical modeling that you just presented, and the neighborhood scale kind of monitoring, where we know our monitoring networks are not where we want them to be for the reasons that you have mentioned. It's it's cost prohibitive in many ways. So what needs to happen to kind of bridge that gap? Are there any best practices you might be able to mention that the steering committee can take into account? Sorry, that was a long question.
Yeah, maybe, hey, Jeremy, maybe I'll start. And if you want to add to this one. So yeah, we're 3 years into the program right now. And there's a total of 15 communities that have been selected. So just to start, we're still learning on this. We're still learning how to turn this kind of work around. And in particular, for example, with the portside community, developing a community emission reduction program within a year and having this kind of work available takes some forethought as well. So we are still learning. However, Jeremy's team, they're experts in both the local scale and regional scale modeling. Jeremy alluded to at the beginning of the presentation, I think, on Carb's thinking through a triennial modeling approach. So having some regional modeling and using the types of tools that he's presented here on a routine basis. But again, that would be rotating through the state. And I'll let Jeremy kind of add to maybe the type of work that is ongoing there. But we're also looking at other, there are other communities as well I think South Coast, for instance, looking at their MATES program. But these are all typically longer term, complex types of endeavors. So we really are trying to think, how do we meet short-term needs with really short-term turnarounds?
Mm.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we're hoping to get out of this discussion is that, as Vernon said, I mean, we are planning on doing this sort of triennial modeling, where every few years we kind of update the regional toxics modeling that we're doing. But we want to do it, or we want to be able to do it in a way that's most informative to the community. So we're hoping that this discussion today, and as you know, we proceed with future discussions, that we can learn more about the types of information you need to sort of inform your work, and then we can think about how we can tailor the regional modeling to answer some of those questions on the local scale.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. I was just, I think this is helpful to also get a sense of how are toxics different from criteria pollutants, and what AB617 presents as a unique opportunity for toxics, you know, compared to GHGs or criteria pollutants. So this is helpful. Thank you.
I had just one question, basic question. Is, you know, the 617 has a monitoring plan. Are any of the monitors from that used for this modeling, or no? Because I mean, they weren't up in 2017, I guess, right? So, but for future they would?
Yeah, so that's true. We still would love to be able to get access to that data, though, because even though we can't necessarily use it to do a detailed model evaluation, we can still use it to, you know, as more of a qualitative assessment of our modeling. And so it would still be very useful, even now, even with the disconnect in terms of the years. But
Yeah, I think we can move it with Jack for the last question.
Thanks. And Daniel, I asked that question a month or two ago, and there was a response, because I was asking the district how long it was going to take to actually have that monitoring data. And I think at the time the estimate was something close to 3 years. Hopefully maybe that'll happen sooner. The question I had quickly was for Jeremy, because one of your slides, you just used the phrase, and I just wanted to ask you what this meant. You said that the data that was shown there on slide 39 was analogous to regional air models, or maybe it was regional meteorological data. I'm not sure.
This was just a way to it oversimplifies everything, but you can kind of think of the chemistry model that we're using here is really, they're designed to be used regionally. So you can go down to pretty high resolution, but nothing like you can with the dispersion modeling. And so it's somewhat analogous to a weather model, right? Or a weather kind of forecast. That's how we think of the models, more on a regional basis than a really local scale. That's all I was trying to get at with this.
Okay, not super finite and detailed in terms of specific streets, but more community-wide type. Okay, I got you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any last questions or comments for Carb?
I think Domingo has a comment. So go ahead, Domingo, you can just unmute.
Thank you. I just wanted again to thank Carb. I know that it's a tremendous amount of work that has gone into preparing this not just a presentation, obviously, but the modeling and all the work behind the data that you're showing here, and numerous staff also that were pulled into this effort. So just wanted to thank you for your support and acknowledge all the hard work that you've been doing for the community. So thank you.
Well, we're happy to do what we can. So you're very welcome.
Thank you. And if anybody has any questions or wants to give you comments, Carb, any comments, is there any way they can message someone from Carb?
Absolutely, yeah. Liliana is our contact, our liaison for Carb. So yeah, funneling the question through Liliana would be great.
Awesome, thank you.
Yep.
And Before we move on to the next presentation, AC from the Navy had a quick follow-up for his presentation.
Yeah, I think Joy had asked a question about when we transfer our power, the ships to shore power, which we call cold iron. When we cold iron the ships and they're on shore power, exactly how much savings and emissions do we actually have, do we create? And I actually, I remember I posed this question to one of my staff engineers, and we made some calculations. And so, and they're really, and it's actually quite exciting and significant. So, if all the, when the ships are on cold iron or are being cold ironed at Naval Base San Diego, we estimate on an annual basis savings of reducing diesel PM by 61 tons. We reduce PM, particulate matter, by 65 tons, and that's tons per year. For carbon monoxide, CO, it's 300 tons. For SOx, sulfur dioxides, we reduce emissions by 394 tons. And then NOx, so on the side, if you took all the emissions from Naval Base San Diego, our nitrous oxides emissions amount to about 40 tons. So the savings we create for cold iron ships for NOx is 100-fold. It's 4,000 tons. So if you add those numbers up, we actually, Navy, by cold ironing our ships, we reduce emissions by almost 5,000 tons a year. And that, to me, that's a great number to talk about. Representatives of Navy, you always strive to be good stewards to the environment and also partners to the community. And I feel like this is at least one way to show that, one example of showing that. So, and of course, we're committed to the Serp, and again, doing things that we can as best as we can, traffic reductions, et cetera. So that's all I just wanted to point out, and thank you.
Thank you, AC. Great info. If anybody doesn't have any questions on that, I think we can move on with Kathy, who'll give us an update on the AB617 incentive funding.
Great. Yay. So we're going to take all that information that we just learned from all of that modeling and help inform what we're doing with our incentive programs. Oh, good. Daniela, are you going to run slides? I did make them prettier. I apologize to all of you in advance. They're boring because I didn't have time for pictures. So stick with us. Okay, so just to start out with a quick, hang on, let me get my act together here. Sorry. I just want to look at my notes to make sure I cover everything I'm supposed to. So tonight's just an information item. We're going to, can you go back one slide, Daniela? Just so we're not distracted by this just yet. It's just, tonight we're going to talk about information item about our incentive programs. My name is Kathy Kean. I'm the manager for the incentive programs at the district, for those of you who I haven't met. Tonight, I just want to talk about the work that's happening now and the work that we'll be asking the steering committee to do over the next probably about 6 months to inform our incentive programs. We'll have some work for you guys to do as we move forward on this. You all hopefully remember that we have special funding that we're allowed to use in our AB617 communities. And so we're going to focus on that tonight. We run other programs, but tonight we're going to focus on the money that we can spend in the AB617 communities. I'm going to go over a couple of the programs that we work on, and then answer questions and take feedback, all of that good stuff. So next slide, please. One of the programs, this is a little bit new for us, is we're working on an air filtration program. So this is a program to provide air filters for community residents to use in their homes. We're excited about this program. We have funding from the county to help put this together. We're targeting trying to do approximately somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 filters and monitors to be able to be distributed in the community. We've gone through, we've taken bids for filters and for monitors. We issued that call for proposals in February, and we're looking at those proposals now. Then once we know what the equipment is going to cost, we're going to release a request for qualifications for someone to administer the program. We're actually going to contract this out and have someone help us with this program at the district to make sure that we're getting the monitors and the filters in the right places to the people who really need them. We're expecting that program overall to roll out this summer. So we'll be working on that in the next couple of months. So since that's a little bit of a new program for us, not something that we've typically done in the past, I just wanted to stop here and see if anybody had any questions about that program before I jump into our others. And you can save them to the end too. It's okay to ask questions at the end as well. So I don't see any hands popping up, so I'm going to jump forward to our AB617 incentives. These are our traditional, we've been doing them 3 whole years. It's tradition now, right? So this year, we were awarded $15 million from the state of California to focus on emission reduction projects in our AB617 communities. So those are projects that we focus on reducing those diesel particulate emissions that they were just talking about in our modeling, because we know that those are an issue in Portside and our other disadvantaged communities. So we focus on the diesel particulate and nitrogen oxide emission reductions. So we're focusing on reducing those. For those of you who may be new to the programs, this is a program that focuses on mobile equipment, so things that move around, trucks, construction equipment, port equipment, that commercial hovercraft that they were talking about in that last presentation. Those are also all the kinds of projects that we could potentially fund with these dollars. So we opened up a solicitation, a request for applications back in November, December of last year. We received about $8.8 million in requests for that money. We had $15 million to spend. We got $8.8 million in requests. Most of the projects were those commercial hovercraft projects. We have several of those that operate in the disadvantaged communities that would qualify. We got some applications for electric school buses that stop in disadvantaged communities, so very excited about those. And then an application for infrastructure for, last year we had an application for an electric tugboat, which we are very, 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 very close to getting ARB approval on. I was hoping to be able to say we have approval on it today, but we're still waiting for the final sign off from ARB, but we expect to have that momentarily. They need a place to plug that in. So we're working on an infrastructure project for that too. So far, when we've gone through those applications, we have about 5.5 million in eligible funding. People ask us for more money than we can give them. So we think that there's about $5.5 million in eligible projects right now on that project list. We are still looking at projects and we are still finalizing the evaluations for those. So these numbers are subject to change as we go forward. So for that set of projects, our next step for those is our staff will be doing inspections and, you know, dotting our I's and crossing our T's to make sure that we have the numbers right for those projects. We hope to bring you a project list in April at our next meeting. Hopefully you got, and we'll bring to you, I know last year we didn't bring you enough information, so this year we're going to bring you more information. We're going to talk about emission reductions and cost and what kinds of projects they are. So we'll be able to have a robust discussion in April for you all to provide some feedback on those. Once we get through through that process and get your feedback on those, we'll work with the approved projects to go to contracting so they can actually get started replacing that old dirty diesel equipment with newer, cleaner machines. So that's the process for those year $3. So let's go to the next slide. If you were paying attention, and I'm sure you were, you'll notice that we have about $10 million in project funding that we still have available to allocate. And we don't have projects right now to put that money on. But we do have a plan. As part of the Serp process, you know, this group has worked so hard on that community emission reduction plan. And one of the reasons we want that plan to move forward and get adopted by the state is because it opens up some flexibility for us, that we're no longer restricted to do things specifically by our old traditional Moyer guidelines. And so we think this is a big opportunity for us to move forward with that $10 million to say, what else do we want to do? What Serp projects do we want to do with that $10 million that we have available to us? So let's go to the next slide. So what we want to do over the next several months is to take some of those ideas that we've heard from all of you in the community emission reduction plan and start talking about which ones we want to tackle first. Because there's a process that we need to go through for the Air Resources Board to allow us to have that flexibility. We need to tell them a lot of information about what we'd like to do. So over the next few months, we're going to be hoping to set up some discussion points with you all here on this committee to talk about what are your highest priority projects. We've heard a lot about electric trucks. I expect those will be on the list, but do we want to look at financing electric port equipment? Trees, vegetative barriers? Do we want to expand the air filtration program? Do we want to look at some passenger car programs for residents who live in the communities? Are there other projects in the Serp that you guys would like to tackle first? So we want to think about that. Once we get through a little bit of that prioritization process, we want to then we'll go back and we'll do some work to create detailed plans for the Air Resources Board to take a look at what are the project limits, cost effectiveness, how much we want to pay for those projects. If we're going to get rid of things like a scrappage requirement, right now you have to get rid of the old equipment to qualify for money. Do we want to get rid of that for some of these electric projects, for example? We'll need to calculate what we expect the emission reductions for those programs to be, and we'll have to figure out how we want to do outreach and application and funding process as part of those projects. So do the last slide, and this I think is my last slide. I just wanted to give you a sense of the tentative timeline. So I think in April we'll talk about the applications that we received last year and see where we are with those and get the steering committee's feedback on that. In May, we'd like to have a discussion about talking about those emission reduction plan options. What pieces do we want to move with first? Because we don't have infinite resources. We're going to have to pick and choose which things we want to do first. So we'll hopefully narrow down on 3 of the options and then work with all of you throughout the summer to put together those plans for the Air Resources Board so that when the Air Resources Board adopts the Serp, we will be ready to go with those flexibilities to be able to use this incentive money on projects that the community really wants to see happen. So with that, I'd happy to answer questions for folks.
Thank you. I saw that Joy had her hand raised first.
I saw that too.
Yeah, Kathy, thanks for that. I was going to ask a question I think you've answered, because we did talk so much about the need to, be more flexible in the requirements for the grants. And we're still hearing about that, especially from port tenants. So I want to make sure that that was still in the process. So
yep.
Thank you for addressing that.
That's what we'll be doing this summer, is really hoping to open up those programs and address those concerns.
Thank you. And up next we have Elisa.
Thank you, Chuy, and thank you, Kathy, for the presentation. Yeah, excited that we can talk about, other categories of projects also. And I'm wondering, for the May meeting, would it be possible to kind of get a sense for kind of sample emissions reductions to kind of get a sense for, how much, say, this particular matter emissions could be reduced by different categories of projects? I know we don't have projects yet, but if there's some understanding of which projects would provide more emissions reductions, that may be something that would be relevant for the committee to know.
That's a great idea. I'm not sure we can pull that off, but
Okay.
we could try.
Okay.
Let us see what we could do between now and May. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
It's a great idea.
Thank you. Any other questions for Kathy?
I have one question, Kathy.
Sure.
Is there a timeline for, is there a time by which you have to spend the $10 million? Is there a deadline?
There is a deadline. There's always a deadline. Yeah, but the good news is the deadline for this money is pretty far away. It's, I believe, the end of, I want to say 2024.
Oh,
so
good.
we have some time. The projects that we're talking about doing, though, I mean, if we're going to open up the categories and do some really innovative and new things, some of those projects are going to take longer than our usual take an old truck to the dismantler, buy a new truck off the lot. So we're going to have to build in some time if we're doing really interesting and new electric equipment, for example. That's going to take longer. So we are going to have to factor that in as we go through the process.
Thank you. And I see Roman has his hand raised.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy, for that presentation. Yeah, looking forward to the upcoming conversations. Kind of on this point about the timing of applications, or just like the more flexibility that we'll have. With that flexibility, do you know if we'll be able to be more targeted, like rather than just opening it up for like solicitations or proposals, like can we be more detailed in like on our end and say, like, let's say we do choose like a tree program or something, right? That like we can determine that on our own, or does it have to go through like the normal process for approving projects?
That's a really good question, Roman, and I'm not sure that I have all of the answers to that yet. Some of that's going to depend on you all, how you want those programs to be structured. We will have to have some controls over the funding. But I'm not sure exactly what those will look like yet. We have to sit down and think about, yeah, if we're going to have a tree program, what does that look like? Who administers it? How many trees would there be? Is it an organization that's going to plant those trees? Would we do trees to individual homeowners? There's a lot of stuff that we have to figure out as part of that, and I don't know the answers yet, but we'll be talking about them this summer.
Okay, great. I'm glad just to know that we do have that flexibility on that as well. So
yeah, and bring your ideas. I mean, today's presentation was to get you started to think about those kind of things so that we can really have some good discussions over the next couple of months about how we want to do this. So as you're walking around the community, start thinking about what we want to do now.
Thank you. And I see Janice has her hand raised.
Hello, buenas tardes.
Hi.
We do have a current opportunity, and there's definitely time to invest in the Serp as far as our input for greening of Logan and Portside communities. So more gardens and more parks, but we do have free trees now through our partner nonprofit organizations for residents all along Portside and these communities of Logan Heights, National City. So please reach out to Domingo or myself. I'm included in the email that he sent out last time about the free trees that we already have available to distribute this summer. Thank you.
That's really exciting. Yes, participate in that. Absolutely. Oops, that's my timer to tell me to stop talking. So,
any more questions?
Hi there, this is Liana. Hi, Kathy. Thank you for the presentation. Hey, something obviously kind of comes to mind as We know like some of the port tenants that have applied for funding and have been unsuccessful for one reason or another, or they just are not getting like the extreme emission reductions because the limited miles that they travel around, the port there has been a barrier for other programs, but it doesn't mean that it's not a good program. And I would just love to see those, port tenants who have attempted to apply for like core funding and been turned down, considered for this. So there's one in particular that's coming to mind.
Great. Well, we'll definitely.
I'm going to come with a list of ideas for you, Kathy. This
Terrific.
summer.
That's just what we want. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any more questions? Jack?
Thank you. I couldn't tell, no, Kathy, thank you as usual. Great presentation. Always so upbeat. You're a great model for us.
It's the incentives. Who could be sad about giving money away?
Exactly. Exactly. I couldn't tell who made the recommendation about the suggestion about being able to provide emission, or I guess assign emission reduction benefits to specific options that we would have in this, because I couldn't see who that was speaking, but I thought that was a very good recommendation, and I would like to see that same sort of approach applied to, frankly, all the goals and all of the efforts and ideas that are put forth here, particularly when it comes down to really prioritizing and deciding where we're going to start and what's going to be done, whether it's trees or zero emission vehicles or whatever it is, to be able to look and say, what emission reduction benefits does the community get for this particular action? I think that would really help put things in perspective. So whoever made that suggestion, thank you. I thought it was a good one.
Yeah, I think we'll do, it's a great idea. I think what we want to do, Jack, is to, again, I'm not sure how much we'll actually be able to do of this, but to get a sense that it was Elisa Arias who had that suggestion, so she gets the credit for it. But to think about not just the emission reduction benefits, but the other ancillary benefits of the projects that we may do, that there may be, there's benefits to greening, for example. They may not be emission reduction benefits, but they may be cooling benefits or greenhouse gas emission reductions, or, there's some other benefits to those projects. And that's going to be up to us, all of us in this room, to help weigh the importance of those things as we figure out how we spend these limited resources. So yeah, I think we have a lot to talk about. And I saw one quick question about quantitative and qualitative metrics for those. So yeah. I know we're close to end time, and I don't want to take up all the time, but keep thinking of those great questions, you guys. We'll be having more conversations.
Thank you, Kathy. And now moving forward to public comments. General public comment. Seeing none. And I'll pass it on to Daniela to close us off.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks to Chewy for leading us throughout the meeting. Thanks to everyone for a great presentation. We're about to end on time. I did want to give one update for the steering committee members that received the stipends. So as a reminder, the charter was updated to include a stipend for community residents who represent the steering committee as a community rep. So we are trying to get, you have not received your February stipend check, and that it's not lost in the mail. We just are waiting for the receipt from the payment for the air district to us so we can issue those checks. And so I will email you all tomorrow with an update on that. And if you have any questions ever about your stipend, feel free to reach out to me directly at Daniela@betterworldgroup.com. And so I'll put my email in the chat, but you should all always have lots of emails from me in your inbox. And that's my final and only update. And I don't know, Domingo, if you want to close us out or.
Thank you, Daniela. Nothing much to add. Just again, a big thank you to all of our presenters today and all of the different stakeholders who are doing really good work to get us to the finish line on the Serp and also to get us to reduce emissions in the community. So thank you, everybody.
Hey, any last comments or closing thoughts?
Yeah, Danielle, I just wanted to tell you and Domingo, nice job on putting together an agenda that was a true 2-hour agenda. That I know how hard that is to do, but it worked out really well. I thought we got to everybody's comments, you know, delved into the subjects to the degree we needed to, and it was very productive. So thank you for the work on that, and really enjoyed hearing the good news from the Navy and from the port and the shipyards and from Carb and yes, from Kathy on as well.
And thank you also to Kayla Rodriguez, who got fabulous comments from everyone in the Spanish room. And Alicia wants to make a comment, so go ahead, Alicia.
Nomás darle las gracias por toda la información, estuvo muy bien. Fue mucha información, pero todos aprendemos poquito.
Gracias, Alicia.
Gracias, Alicia.
Thank you for the information and the great meeting. It was a lot of information, but it was good. So, wonderful. Bueno, gracias a ustedes a todos por su participación cada mes. It's a highlight of our night, of our month with you guys. Okay, with that, we'll close the meeting. Thank you to everybody, and take care and have a good night and be safe.
Good night. Buenas noches.
Buenas noches.